What would you do if the most feared Mafia boss in the city stormed into your hospital and demanded the wounded man you had hidden from his gunman? Curvy Knight, Nurse Elena Brooks knew Luca Moretti could end her life with a single command on it. Yet she stood between him and the locked operating room and refused to move. Everyone believed she was protecting a murderer who had betrayed Luca and slaughtered 3 of his men, and had discovered something no one else knew. The unconscious fugitive had spent his final strength shielding Lucas' missing 6-year-old nephew from a bullet, and the real traitor was already standing among the boss' most trusted soldiers. Luca raised his gun and ordered Elena aside. She placed his nephew's blood-stained bracelet in his hand and whispered, "If you kill that man, you'll bury the only person who can lead you to the boy." Then, every light in the hospital went out. The darkness swallowed St. Catherine's emergency wing so completely that Elena could hear every frightened breath around her. A woman whimpered behind the nurse's station, and somewhere down the corridor a metal tray struck the floor. Luca's pistol remained inches from Elena's chest, invisible now, but she could feel the cold circle of its barrel through her scrub top. "Nobody moves," he said. He did not shout. He never needed to. His voice traveled through the dark with the certainty of a locked door. Elena closed her fingers around the small flashlight, clipped beneath her ID badge, but did not switch it on. Backup power should have started within 7 seconds. She counted to 10. Nothing happened. Whoever had cut the electricity had also disabled the generators. "This isn't the city grid," she said. Someone shut us down from inside. A gunshot cracked from the eastern stairwell. Luca seized Elena by the arm and pulled her behind the concrete pillar beside the operating room, answered with 2 controlled shots. And then came a scream that ended too suddenly. Elena's mind separated the sounds the way years of emergency work had trained it to separate symptoms. A shooter near radiology, heavy footsteps at the north entrance, glass breaking near the pharmacy, a child crying 2 floors above. This was not an attack meant only for Luca, and the intruders were sealing the hospital. Luca's lieutenant, Marco Bellini, appeared from the dark with a tactical light beneath his handgun. He was broad, silver at the temples. I'd served the Moretti family since Luca was a boy. "Boss, we have to move. The east exit is compromised." His beam passed over Elena, the bracelet in Luca's hand, and the blood on the operating room handle. In a second, Marco's expression changed. Elena saw recognition before he buried it. Luca saw only urgency. "Get the vehicles around back," he ordered. "We take the prisoner with us." "And Paolo, Enzo, and Vittorio," Marco said. "He dies here. He talks first." Marco's jaw tightened. "You risking everyone for a traitor." Elena spoke before fear could stop her. "How did you know he was here?" The lieutenant turned his light directly into her eyes. "What?" "Mr. Moretti's people searched the city for hours. I admitted the man 10 minutes ago under a false name. Owns are dead. The system is offline, and I told no one. So how did you arrive before he was even stabilized?" Luca looked at Marco. The lieutenant lowered the beam. "One of our street teams followed the blood trail." "There was no trail," Elena said. "He arrived inside a laundry truck for the first time." Silence unsettled Luca Moretti. Elena had expected the city's most feared man to look monstrous. Instead, he looked controlled, tall, black-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit, wet from the rain, his face handsome in a severe way that seemed carved for old coins and courtroom sketches. Eyes betrayed him. They were the eyes of an uncle who had not slept since a child vanished. Marco lifted his radio. "We can argue when we re-safe." Static burst from the speaker, followed by a man's voice. "Ward C secured. Find the nurse." Elena recognized the voice. Dr. Adrian Vale, the hospital's deputy administrator, had spoken those exact words in staff meetings for 3 years. Impatient. Now he was directing armed men. She leaned close to Luca. "The administrator knows. I hid your prisoner." "How?" "Because I lied to him." Luca's stare sharpened. "Nonsense." The wounded man came in wearing a paramedic jacket, but there was no ambulance call. Dr. Vale saw the security alert and demanded, "I transfer him upstairs." I said he died before arrival. "I'm here." "Why protect him?" "Because he woke for 12 seconds. He gave me that bracelet and said a boy named Nico was alive, he said. Don't trust the ring. Luca's fingers closed around the bracelet. It was blue woven cord with a silver wolf charm, the gift he had given his nephew 3 weeks earlier. Nico had refused to remove it, even in the bath. Dried blood darkened the fibers. It was not the child's blood. Luca knew, because a small smear on the silver charm had turned nearly black. Nico's blood condition made it clot differently, and every member of the family knew it, and he asked. Probably the patient's he has 2 gunshot wounds and a deep knife cut. If we don't restore power, he won't survive surgery. Marco moved closer. This is a trap. Elena heard something personal in the use of his first name. Marco was not merely a soldier. He was family by loyalty that made him more dangerous, not less. A red emergency lamp flickered weakly above the corridor, powered by its own battery. In the dim light, Elena saw the black onyx ring on Marco's right hand, the same ring engraved with a wolf that Luca wore. Trust no one wearing my ring. The fugitive had tried to say, but he had lost consciousness after the 3rd word. Elena had guessed the rest from the way his gaze fixed on the photograph of Luca displayed in the news alert on her phone. Who else has that ring? She asked. Luca did not look away from Marco. 7 men, my inner counsel. Then one of 7 men gave Dr. Vale the order to shut down this hospital. Marco's pistol rose. Mark's too much. Luca moved faster. His hand closed around Marco's wrist, forcing the muzzle toward the ceiling. The 2 men stared at each other, their faces only inches apart. You'd point a weapon at her, Luca said. Not until I know why someone is trying so hard to silence her. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the lobby doors. Patients screamed. Gave Marco an excuse to pull away. Take your nurse, he said bitterly. I'll hold the corridor. Elena unlocked the operating room. Inside, Dr. Prius, Shah, and surgical resident Owen Miles were manually ventilating the unconscious fugitive. According to the forged driver's license in his pocket, was Daniel Cross. Luca knew him as Thomas Rinaldi, a former Moretti security captain who had disappeared 48 hours earlier. After 3 soldiers were found dead at a warehouse and Nico was taken from the family chapel. Thomas lay grey-faced beneath the surgical lamps, dark hair clotted with blood. 1 bullet had passed through his shoulder, the 2nd remained near his liver. We need power, blood, and a surgeon, Pryor said. He has maybe 20 minutes. I stepped beside the table. Thomas' eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice. Where is Nico? Luca demanded. The wounded man tried to speak, but blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. I bent close. Don't force it. Blink once if the boy is alive. 1 blink. Luca's entire body changed, not softening exactly, but turning from stone into a weapon with a purpose. Us to him? Elena asked. 1 blink, then Thomas' eyes rolled back. The cardiac monitor went blank as its internal battery failed. Pryor felt for a pulse. He's crashing. Elena began compressions, while Owen squeezed the ventilation bag. There's an old disaster generator in the basement, she said between counts. It was disconnected after the flood. Facilities kept it operational. Manuel Ortiz knows how to start it. Where is he? Luca asked. Maintenance office. Lower level, get him. You want to know the old tunnels. Luca looked at her hands pressing rhythmically against the chest of a man accused of murdering his soldiers. You stay here. If I stay, Thomas dies when your men shoot the wrong person or disconnect the wrong line. I go. Priya can keep him alive for 10 minutes. Your choice. It was the first time anyone in that room had spoken to Luca as if he were merely another person standing in the way of a solution. I expected anger. Instead, Luca removed his suit jacket, placed it over the back of a chair, and rolled up his sleeves. Tell me how to help. Elena guided his hands into position for compressions. Asked, don't stop until Dr. Shah tells you. Then she took Marco's tactical flashlight from the corridor and led Owen toward the service stairs. Luca ordered 2 soldiers to follow. One objected, but Luca silenced him with a look. The basement smelled of bleach, wet cement, and old steam pipes. Elena moved quickly despite the ache in her knees and the fear tightening her lungs. On it. She had always been judged before she was known too large for elegance, too gentle for trauma medicine, too ordinary to notice the secrets of powerful men. But hospitals taught a person to see what others dismissed. Under a wedding ring, a bruise hidden by makeup, a medication chart altered by one digit. 3 nights earlier, Elena had noticed Dr. Vale ordering unusual quantities of a sedative called etorphine under veterinary research exemptions. 1 drop could paralyze a man while leaving him conscious. She had filed a discrepancy report. It vanished from the system within an hour. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a security guard face down in the water, alive but unconscious. Owen knelt beside him, needle mark behind the ear. Etorphine, Elena said. Vale is using the hospital to move drugs. A shadow crossed the boiler room doorway. Yes. Soldiers fired, and a maintenance worker fell with a cry. "Stop!" Elena shouted. She rushed forward and pressed gauze against the man's thigh. He wore grey coveralls and carried a wrench. "A gun. That's a manual." The soldier swore. "He came at us because armed strangers invaded his workplace." Manuel's face tightened with pain. "Elena, they took the fuel relay. Generator won't start without it." "I pass it?" "Maybe. Need copper cable and a manual crank." Owen pointed toward the old electrical room. The second soldier stayed with Manuel while Elena, Owen, and the first soldier continued. In the electrical room, they found Dr. Vale waiting with 2 gunmen. His hospital badge hung neatly against his tailored coat, as though he had come to approve a budget. "Elena, and I underestimated you. You nearly killed 300 people to reach 1 patient. Most are not in danger. The ventilated patients have battery reserves for 30 minutes. I'd finish quickly." Vale's gunman disarmed Luca's soldier. Owen moved in front of Elena, but Vale shook his head. "I only need the nurse. Mr. Miles can go." "Why me?" Elena asked. "As Thomas spoke to you, and because you found the medication discrepancy. Curiosity is admirable until it becomes expensive." Elena glanced at the missing fuel relay on a table behind him. A small green light pulsed on its casing. "You reworking for one of Moretti's councilmen. I work for stability." Luca's mercy toward his sister made him vulnerable. His attachment to her son made him reckless. The city cannot be managed by sentiment. You kidnapped a 6-year-old child. I provided medical logistics. Others handled the unpleasant part." "Is Nico here?" Vale smiled. "You are asking the right question too late." A syringe. Elena recognized the veterinary sedative by its amber color. "This will look like cardiac arrest, a tragic consequence of the blackout." Owen lunged. 1 gunman struck him with the pistol. Lapsed. Elena backed toward a shelf lined with industrial cleaners. Vale advanced, confident that her size made her slow. He did not know Elena had spent 12 years moving unconscious adults, twice her weight, through crowded emergency rooms. When he reached for her arm, she twisted, used his momentum, and drove his wrist against the metal edge. The syringe flew into the darkness. She shoved the shelf. Bottles crashed between them, spilling disinfectant across the floor. Luca's soldier tackled 1 gunman. Owen caught the other behind the knees. Vale grabbed the fuel relay and ran through the rear door. Elena followed into a narrow utility passage and heard an engine starting beyond the loading bay. Not catch him, but she saw him toss a black bag into a waiting laundry van. On its rear door was the logo of CleanCo Medical Linen, the same company whose truck had brought Thomas to the hospital. Eyes the plate as the van sped into the rain. Back in the electrical room, Manuel had dragged himself downstairs with the help of the other soldier. He examined the damaged controls. At the relay. "I can give you 1 circuit for maybe 15 minutes. Operating room," Elena said. "Nothing else. ICU patients need power," Owen protested. "Portable batteries will last another 20. Elena hated the arithmetic, but triage was the art of choosing where minutes could still become a life. Manuel connected copper cable with shaking hands. The generator coughed, roared, and 1 bank of lights came alive. When Elena returned upstairs, Luca was still performing compressions. Sweat darkened his shirt. Pryor had opened Thomas' abdomen under battery-powered lamps and soaked the drapes. "Power," Elena called. The monitors beeped awake. A pulse appeared weak, irregular, real. Pryor began surgery. Luca stepped back, his hands red to the wrists. A moment he stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. "You kept him alive," Elena said. "Don't it make it sound noble? I need him. Sometimes mercy begins for selfish reasons. This is mercy. You could have shot him. Instead, you gave him a chance to speak. What it becomes is up to you." Marco entered with blood on his collar. "We cleared the West Wing," I kept. "You knew him," Luca said. "I knew his name. He treated your father. He knew Elena had Thomas before we did." Marco's expression hardened. Then someone talked. Someone with my ring. I looked at each of his men. The accusation moved through the room like smoke. Marco pulled his ring off and placed it on the instrument table. "If you suspect me, say it. I suspect everyone." "Me?" "Especially anyone who thinks loyalty makes him immune to questions." Before Marco could answer, the doors opened and 2 firefighters entered, followed by city police. Someone had restored the public alarm. Lucas' men concealed their weapons. Elena stepped between the officers and the operating room. "Electrical sabotage and an armed assault," she said. "The shooter fled in a Cleanco laundry van, plate 67 Kilo Mari 2. The lead officer wrote nothing. His gaze went to Luca, then to Marco, and he quietly closed his notebook. Understood. The conspiracy was wider than one hospital. Luca understood too. "We leave before sunrise," he told her. "Thomas comes with us. He cannot be moved. This building is compromised. In the next 6 hours, we'll kill him. Staying may kill everyone." Elena looked toward the ICU, where exhausted nurses were pushing portable oxygen tanks between rooms. "Protect the building. Your war entered my hospital. You don't get to solve that by abandoning it." Marco gave a humorless laugh. "She gives orders now." Luca watched Elena wrap a bandage around Manuela's wounded leg, the maintenance worker by name. She did not plead for safety for herself. Every choice she made widened the circle of people she intended to protect. Luca had spent his life narrowing circles until only family remained. Family had betrayed him. "Seal every entrance," he ordered. "No Moretti man leaves. Bring fuel, generators, and every clean ambulance we control. The hospital is under my protection until Thomas can move." 9 minutes. Black vehicles surrounded St. Catherine S. Portable generators arrived from construction companies owned through Moretti subsidiaries. Electricians repaired the damaged transfer switch. Lucas, soldiers carried oxygen tanks instead of rifles through the corridors. Patients who had been terrified by their arrival watched the same men restore power to the neonatal unit. Knew fear could buy obedience, but she was witnessing something stranger. Power redirected by one decision. At 4 a.m, Pryor removed the bullet and stabilized Thomas. "An hour a week," she said. "His liver is damaged. Infection is the next danger." Elena sat beside the bed, her scrubs stained, curls escaping their tie. Luca stood at the window. He said. That sounded almost like concern. It was an instruction. "Then the answer is no. Do you always challenge armed men only when they interfere with patient care?" A shadow of amusement touched his face and vanished. "Why did you become a nurse?" "My father died in a waiting room because everyone assumed the large black man asking for help was exaggerating his chest pain. At 16, I decided no one in my care would become invisible." Luca looked at Thomas. "He killed 3 of mine, maybe, but you don't know yet. Paolo had 2 daughters. Enzo's mother calls me every Sunday. Vittorio saved my life when I was 23. Mercy for Thomas could be cruelty to their families." Elena nodded. "That's true. Mercy isn't pretending harm. Never happened. It is delaying judgment until you know who caused it." Turned the bracelet in his hand. "Nico's mother, my sister Sophia, died last year. I promised her no one would touch him. A promise isn't broken because someone attacks it. It's broken only if you stop trying to keep it." Hit a place Luca protected more carefully than any vault. He pulled a chair beside Thomas' bed and remained there until dawn. At 6:15, Thomas woke screaming Nico's name. I steadied him while Luca leaned close. Where is he?" Thomas' eyes filled with terror when he saw Marco outside the glass. His heart rate spiked. "Not him," he rasped. "Who? Ring Wolf? Ring inside." "Marco," Luca asked. Thomas shook his head violently. "No, copy, Vale." "Copied rings," he coughed. pain tearing through him. Elena administered medication, but he gripped her wrist. Laundry white chapel beneath water. St. Orison, old reservoir. Luca knew the place. St. Orison's chapel had been submerged when the northern reservoir expanded 30 years ago, during drought. Our tower sometimes rose above the surface. A Moretti company now operated a filtration plant nearby. Why take Nico there? Vault, Thomas whispered. Your father S. Ledger. Marco stepped into the room. Ledger, Thomas recoiled. Luca blocked Marco's path out. You still think I did this? He is terrified of something connected to my ring until I understand why you stay away. Its pride flashed into anger. I raised you after your father died, then trust the man you raised to find the truth. Marco left, but Elena noticed him press a hand against his ribs, and blood seeped between his fingers. He had been wounded during the attack and hidden it. She followed him into the supply room. Sit down, I don't take orders from nurses. Tonight everyone does. Reluctantly lifted his shirt. A bullet had grazed his side. Elena cleaned the wound. If you were the traitor, you could have let Luca die in the dark. Maybe I need him alive until the ledger opens. Thinking. Marco looked old for the first time. Luca's father gave 7 rings to 7 councilmen. One vanished when Carlo Ventresca was buried. Vale treated Carlo during his final illness. Copied a dead man's ring or stole the original before the coffin closed. Who inherited Carlo's businesses? His son, Julian. Luca's cousin. The name meant little to Elena. I remembered a photograph from a charity gala. A blond man with an easy smile standing beside Dr. Vale. Does Julian control the filtration company? Marco stared at her. Yes. I wanted to move immediately on St. Orison, but Elena refused to let him take Thomas. Instead, she proposed a trade. Vale thinks Thomas told me everything. Let him believe you removing me, to become bait. I want them to reveal which route they were watching. You said 7 rings. We need to know which councilman sends men after me. Luca rejected the plan before she finished, folded her arms. You invaded my workplace, pointed a gun at me, and turned my night shift into a siege. You do not get to become protective now because it's convenient. Convenient. Ice dropped. They will cut information out of you. Then don't let them take me. Marco tried not to smile. Luca noticed and glared at him. Eventually they staged Elena's transfer in a Moretti ambulance, while Thomas remained hidden in an isolation room under Pria's care. 6 vehicles left the hospital by separate exits, each carrying a woman in blue scrubs. Only Luca, Elena, and driver Matteo Ruiz occupied the real ambulance. Elena lay beneath a blanket with a tracking transmitter taped to her ribs, across from her pistol, resting on his thigh. If this goes wrong, you do exactly what I say. If I am bleeding, I decide whether I need a tourniquet. This is why people find you difficult. Find me difficult. When I refuse to make their mistakes easier. The ambulance crossed the river. 2 motorcycles appeared behind them. A delivery truck blocked the intersection ahead, Matteo into an alley. Gunfire struck the rear doors. Luca pulled Elena to the floor and returned fire through the side window. Matteo accelerated, clipping 1 motorcycle. But the delivery truck rammed the ambulance. Metal folded. Elena's shoulder hit the cabinet. The vehicle tipped onto its side and slid through a market awning. By the time it stopped, filled the compartment. Luca's leg was trapped beneath a bent bench. Elena crawled toward him. Leave me, he ordered as footsteps approached. You must be new here. She used an oxygen wrench as a lever. Shifted barely an inch. Outside, masked men pulled at the rear doors. Luca fired through them, buying seconds. Elena braced both feet against the wall and heaved. Pain exploded through her back. But the bench rose enough for Luca to free his leg. Matteo kicked out the windshield, and they escaped into the abandoned market. Elena supported Luca despite his protests. His ankle was badly injured. Hackers spread through the stalls. One shouted, "The nurse alive. Moretti can burn." That was the confirmation they needed. The command came through a radio frequency. Marco was monitoring. Moretti vehicles closed both ends of the street. The attackers fled into a warehouse, where Marco's men captured one. He wore a filtration company's security badge. I wanted answers immediately. Elena insisted on treating the captive's gunshot wound first. "He tried to kill us," Matteo said, "and now he is unarmed. You would save anyone. That is the job." The captive, a young man named Caleb, stared at her as she removed the bullet from his arm. "Why?" he asked. "Because pain shouldn't be used as currency." Something in him broke. Luca, that Julian Ventresca had ordered the ambush and that Nico was being held in a dry chamber beneath the old reservoir at noon, and Julian planned to force the child's fingerprint and retinal scan to open a biometric vault established by Luca's father. The vault contained evidence linking judges, police officials, executives, and politicians to decades of Moretti crimes. Julian intended to take the ledger, kill Nico, and frame Thomas. "Why does Nico's eye open it?" Elena asked. Luca's face darkened. They built the vault for Sofia. After she died, her access transferred to her son. How did Julian know? Only the council knew. Marco arrived with news from the other decoy vehicles, followed by men loyal to different council members, but only Elena's ambulance had been attacked. The route had been known by 4 people: Luca, Marco, Matteo, and council attorney Victor Sands, who coordinated the decoys. Matteo had driven for Luca for 8 years and nearly died in the crash. Marco had fought to reach them. Victor had stayed safely at the command center, Luca said, or someone listening to him. Elena remembered Vela's words. Stability, sentiment, a city managed without mercy. Julian may be the visible traitor, but the person shaping the argument sounds older. Someone who believes Nico makes you weak. Marco's gaze hardened. "Victor advised your father to send Sofia away when she became pregnant." Luca called the command center and asked Victor for an update, and he replied calmly that all routes were secure. He did not know the ambulance had crashed. Marco had kept it off the radio. Luca told him Elena was being moved to the Moretti River house. Later, Caleb's confiscated phone received a message. "Intercept at River House. Bring nurse to Orison." Victor Sands had condemned himself. Luca ordered his arrest and stopped him. "If he misses the meeting, Julian knows we're coming. You want to leave a traitor in place. For 2 hours, feed him exactly what we need him to believe." Luca looked at her with reluctant respect. "You should have been a strategist." "I am. My battlefield just has worse coffee. At St. Catherine's, Thomas improved enough to speak in full sentences through a secure video call. The kidnapping. Victor had sent him to inspect a suspected theft at warehouse 9. There Thomas found Paolo, Enzo, and Vittorio already dead, each shot with his own weapon. Injected Thomas with etorphine, and Julian S. men placed his fingerprints on a gun. Nico was brought through the warehouse crying but alive. Thomas broke free during transport. Shielded Nico when one captor fired and managed to hide the child inside a linen compartment. But at the filtration plant, Dr. Vale discovered him. Thomas was shot twice before escaping in the laundry truck. I had Nico's bracelet into his pocket, promising the boy he would return. Nico heard them discuss a second vault. Thomas said, "That is why he is still alive. They think he knows the location. I knew of no second vault." Elena asked what Nico might have misunderstood. Thomas closed his eyes. He kept saying his mother left him a mercy box. "Blue key, paper birds." Luca went still. Aya had created a game for Nico before her death. 12 folded paper birds, each containing a memory and a clue leading to a blue music box. Luca had never found the final bird. "A vault," he said. "It is a letter from his mother." But Julian did not know that. They could use the imagined second vault as leverage. The rescue plan formed around the filtration plant's medical weaknesses. Elena studied old municipal blueprints, the dry chamber beneath the reservoir connected to the plant through a decommissioned chlorine tunnel. Moretti soldiers could enter through the water gates, but Julian would see them on security cameras. A smaller team could travel inside an empty chemical delivery tanker and emerge near the treatment lab. Elena insisted on going because Nico had a rare clotting disorder and might need immediate care. I refused again. This time she did not argue emotionally. She placed Nico's hospital record before him. If he is injured, pressure alone may not stop the bleeding. He needs factor concentrate, dosed by weight. I know his latest dosage. because St. Catherine S. treated him 2 months ago. Do any of your soldiers? Luca hated her logic because it left him no honorable excuse. You stay behind me. Medically possible. Marco disguised himself as Victor as prisoner and allowed loyal soldiers to deliver him to the plant, while Victor remained on the phone, unaware he was being traced. Elena, Matteo, and 2 tactical men entered inside the tanker. Shortly before noon, the air smelled of metal and chemicals. Elena carried a medical pack beneath a borrowed ballistic vest and trembled, so she pressed them flat against her thighs. Luca noticed you reafraid. Of course, you don't behave like it. Courage isn't a feeling, it's a schedule. You do what must be done before fear gets its turn. Anka stopped. They climbed through the inspection hatch into a service bay. Security appeared lighter than expected. Elena suspected a trap. Near the laboratory, they found rows of sedated men and women on wheeled cots, dock workers, a city inspector, 2 police officers. Dr. Vale had been using the plant as a detention clinic. Some captives bore fresh needle marks. Others had memory gaps documented on charts. "I'm just moving drugs," Elena whispered. They were erasing witnesses. She photographed every chart and transmitted the images to Prior and federal investigator. Elena trusted from a trafficking case, and that choice widened the operation beyond Luca's control. "You called the government?" he asked. "I sent evidence to someone who will keep these people alive. Rescue first, territory later." I'd have destroyed her phone. Instead, he nodded. In the central control room, Julian Ventresca appeared on the monitors. He had Luca's dark eyes, but wore charm like perfume. Sat strapped to a chair beside him, pale and frightened, a cut above his eyebrow. Dr. Vale stood with a syringe. Victor Sands appeared on another screen from the Moretti command center. Loyalty. "Cousin," Julian said through the speakers. "You brought the nurse." "Excellent." Steel shutters dropped behind Luca's group. Chlorine warning lights began to flash. "Iko," Luca said, "you get me instead. That is the problem with you. You keep offering yourself for people whose deaths would make you stronger." Julian gestured toward the sedated prisoners. Other understood that fear creates order. "You turned his empire into a charity protecting shopkeepers, paying hospital debts, forbidding the old trades. The council is tired of losing money to your conscience. Council follows strength. Then prove yours. Kill the nurse." A pistol slid from a compartment in the wall and landed at Luca's feet. She exposed our hospital network and contacted federal agents. "And I'll believe you can still lead refuse." And chlorine floods her chamber while Nico watches. Elena looked at Luca. The tactical men raised their weapons toward cameras. They could not shoot. Chlorine hissed faintly through the vents. Luca picked up the pistol and aimed at Elena. "I'm sorry," he said. She saw no apology in his eyes, only calculation. "You should be," she answered. Along he fired. The bullet struck the lock on the medical storage cage behind her. The door sprang open, revealing emergency respirators and chemical suits. His men grabbed them. Elena pulled a mask over her face as gas clouded the room. "That mercy will bury you," Julian snarled. Luca shot the camera. They entered the decontamination corridor and forced an access hatch into the old tunnel. Above them, Marco, still posing as a captive, overpowered his escort when the alarms started. Matteo disabled the pumps. Elena followed Luca through ankle-deep water beneath the reservoir. All narrowed, until Luca had to turn sideways. His injured ankle slowed him, but he refused help. "Strength isn't refusing support," Elena said through the respirator. "That sounds like something printed in a hospital hallway. Hospitals print it because men like you keep forgetting." They reached the submerged chapel chamber at 11:53. Through a grate, Elena saw Nico, Julian, and Vale inside the old nave. Water stains marked the stone walls. The biometric vault stood where the altar once had. Victor Sands entered through the opposite door. He had left the command center after discovering Marco's deception. His silver wolf ring gleamed under the lights. "You promised Luca would come alone," Julian said. "He has always mistaken sacrifice for leadership," Victor replied. "He will come for the boy." My suspicion was correct. Victor was the architect, Julian was merely the heir he intended to control. Nico's chair stood beside a drain wired with explosives. Vale prepared the child SI for the retinal scanner. I kicked him. My uncle says doctors who hurt children are cowards. Vale slapped him. Luca moved before the plan allowed. He broke the grate and fired at Vale, hitting the syringe from his hand. Fire erupted. Marco attacked from the upper balcony. Matteo cut the chamber lights. Elena crawled toward Nico as bullets struck stone around her. Julian grabbed the child and pressed a gun beneath his chin. Alt Luca, it requires Nico alive, Luca said. You kill him, you get nothing. Then tell him to cooperate. Luca looked at his nephew. Nico, remember your mother paper birds? Mine's lip trembled, but he nodded. The bluebird says what to do when wolves surround you. Nico closed his eyes. Wolves protect the smallest. And what does the smallest do? Asked low. Nico went limp. Julian lost his grip for 1 second. Luca fired into Julian's shoulder. Elena pulled Nico behind the stone altar, while Marco exchanged shots with Victor. Dr. Vale ran toward the explosive trigger. Thomas appeared in the doorway, supported by Priya S. resident Owen, and wearing a hospital gown beneath a bulletproof vest. He had left St. Catherine S. against medical advice to finish the rescue, called Vale, before the doctor reached the switch. Both men fell into the shallow water. Vale drove a knife toward Thomas' surgical wound. Elena seized a brass candlestick and struck Vale's wrist. Iron dragged Thomas away. Nico was bleeding from the cut above his eye, and the blood would not clot. Elena opened her medical pack, injected factor concentrate, and pressed a hemostatic dressing to the wound. Uncle Luca, angry with me, he whispered. He crossed a city and walked beneath a reservoir to find you. What do you think? I think he's very angry. Terrified people sometimes sound angry. Across the chapel, Victor shot Marco in the chest. Marco Esvest caught the bullet, but he fell. Victor aimed again. Luca had Julian beneath his knee and could not reach his weapon. Saw the danger. He picked up the dropped black ring beside Elena and threw it across the stone floor. The sound distracted Victor. Marco fired from his back, striking Victor's leg. I disarmed him. Julian lunged for the explosive switch. Elena could not reach him, but Caleb, the wounded attacker she had treated in the warehouse, came through the service door with federal agents. The switch from Julian's hand. Elena's mercy had returned through a man. Everyone else considered disposable. Federal officers secured the room. Victor laughed as they cuffed him. Think this ends because a nurse saved a child? The ledger destroys judges, unions, your own family. Open that vault and you destroy the city. Luca looked at Elena. She had blood on her face, arm around Nico, and her free hand, pressed against Thomas, wound. Every person she had spared had become part of the rescue. No, Luca said. It destroys the people who believed the city belonged to them. Nico's hand on the scanner, the vault opened. Inside were paper ledgers, digital drives, photographs, and sealed testimony from victims going back 30 years. There was also a blue envelope addressed to Sophia Moretti, mother. Had built the archive not as blackmail, but as insurance for his daughter, giving her the means to escape the family if Luca failed to change it. Victor had misunderstood the secret he was trying to steal. Handed the evidence to the federal investigator. Every page, he said. Marco stared at him. Surrendering the ledger meant prosecutions, seized businesses, and perhaps prison for men Luca had known all his life. And the Moretti Empire, Marco said. Luca watched Elena carry Nico toward the medical team. Then I'll build something that does to require children to inherit our sins. Vale tried to bargain, offering names in exchange for immunity. Thomas asked Luca for permission to kill him. 3 dead soldiers and 2 days of torture burned in his eyes. Luca looked toward Elena. She did not tell him what to do. Mercy had never meant stealing justice from the harmed. Luca gave Thomas the choice. Thomas held Vale's life in his hands for a long moment, lowered the gun. Let him wake every morning, knowing he failed. Vale received no immunity. Victor and Julian were charged with kidnapping, murder, conspiracy, trafficking, started mass casualty attack. The evidence in the vault triggered the largest corruption investigation the city had seen. 6 councilmen were arrested, the 7th, Marco, voluntarily to answer for crimes committed under Luca's father. Luca did the same. Elena visited him in the federal courthouse, holding room before his hearing. You could run. I have planes, passports, and enough money to disappear. That wasn't my question, I know. He looked through the glass at Nico coloring beside a federal marshal. If I run. Power means never answering for harm. If I stay, perhaps he learned something else. Luca received a reduced sentence after providing evidence and funding restitution for victims. Served 18 months in a minimum security facility. During that time, Elena became director of a new patient protection program at St. Catherine S. She exposed Dr. Hunt's medical network, secured compensation for the captives, and created an anonymous reporting system that could not be erased by one administrator. She visited Luca twice a month. Though neither of them called the visits romantic, they argued about books, hospital policy, and whether his prison kitchen's pasta deserved to be called food. Nico lived with Marco's sister and spent weekends with Elena. Him finish Sophia's paper bird treasure hunt. The final bluebird led to a recording in which Sophia told her son that mercy was not weakness. It was the courage to see a human being where fear demanded an enemy. I came home. There were no black cars waiting outside the prison. He had sold most of the fleet to finance a trauma center named for Paolo, Enzo, and Vittorio, the 3 men whose deaths had begun the conspiracy. Families attended the opening. Thomas, fully recovered, served as security director, but his staff carried medical kits and radios more often than guns. Marco, after cooperating with investigators, worked in a city violence interruption program. Caleb trained as an emergency medical technician. Luca arrived at St. Catherine's S, wearing a simple dark coat and no ring. Met him beneath the same corridor light that had failed the night they first met. You late, she said. 18 months late. I had paperwork. She tried to remain stern. Her smile betrayed her. Luca held out the blue wolf bracelet, cleaned and repaired. Nico says you should keep it. Why me? Because he believes wolves protect the smallest. And what do you believe? And stepped closer. I believed mercy was a luxury powerful men could not afford. Then a nurse protected a man she had every reason to fear, treated an enemy who tried to abduct her. I've a family that pointed a gun at her chest. Every act I called reckless became the reason we survived. Elena took the bracelet. Mercy didn't save you by itself. People made choices, not them. They still had choices. He did not ask her to forgive what he had been. He did not promise he would never fail. Instead, he asked if she would walk with him to the trauma center. I was waiting to cut the ribbon. Elena slipped her hand into his. Outside, the city continued sirens, traffic, arguments, lives moving between danger and hope. Luca Moretti no longer ruled it through fear. Elena Brooks had never wanted to rule it at all. She had only wanted no one to become invisible. Yet because she saw one wounded fugitive as a patient, one terrified boss as an uncle. One captured attacker as a human being, and one frightened child as worth an entire empire, hundreds of people walked free. And when Nico cut the ribbon, he looked at his uncle and asked the question Elena had been waiting to hear. Does this mean the Morettis are good now? Luca knelt, so they were eye to eye. No name makes anyone good. Piccolo, we become good one choice at a time. Nico considered this, then offered half his cookie to Caleb. Laughed. Luca looked at her with the quiet wonder of a man seeing a future he had never believed he deserved. In the old days, 7 black rings had marked the men trusted to protect the Moretti Empire. Now those rings sat sealed in an evidence room. The only symbol Luca kept was a woven blue bracelet on Elena's wrist, stained once by blood and repaired with silver thread, a reminder that the night every light went out. One woman had refused to let mercy disappear with it.